I've played a lot of bad games for this channel. I've played pretentious games. I've played games that confused me. But I don't know if I can find anything that brings together all of those qualities more than the U Testament. Mat Dickey is a British game developer who's been producing games by himself since he was 18, way back in 2000. He does everything himself: programming, graphics, sound, music. He's just like Zun. Oh, if only. No, Mat Dickey is a hack, and I have no problem saying that because he proudly proclaims who he is in the numerous interviews on his website. From 2000 to 2007, he released over 20 wrestling games. Now, he did branch out into other genres like survival and industry simulations, but his self-professed peak came with 2007's Reach, a boxing game that people were sick of before it even came out. Gee, I wonder why. Why have you stopped making PC games? The main reason is that there's very little support for the PC games now, especially when compared to the explosion of mobile apps. The apps are literally downloaded more times in a day than the PC games are in a week, and those people enjoy them more because they're not so cynical. They're more willing to invest in the entertainment they enjoy, whereas PC users want everything for free. He said this in 2013. Here's another one. What are the main reasons for the absence of PC games and the increase of mobile exclusives? PC versions of each game exist, but there's simply nowhere to distribute them that compares to mobile app stores. Steam have a monopoly on that right now, and both the users and the management have made it clear that they're not fans of my work. All I could do is give the PC versions away for free on my own website, which would undermine everything I'm trying to achieve with these active commercial properties. My games are already being played by more people than they could ever reach on Steam, so I'm not motivated to fight for the right to be on there. On what terms would you agree with big digital distributors on PC like Steam and GOG to bring your games to the PC platform? As the developer of 9 different franchises that have surpassed 1 million downloads, I feel I deserve better than the indignity of Steam's green light voting process, and will not submit my games there until it becomes truly open. Historically, anywhere that somebody gets to pass judgment on my work is not a place that I will thrive. This man really said I can't release my games on platforms where people can leave reviews. They won't do well. Oh yeah, the mobile releases. So according to appbrain.com, Dickie is in the top 1% of Android developers with over 200 million downloads of his games ported to mobile devices. Now at some point, not sure when, Dickie became a religious educator. In what he calls the Indian interview, he describes his beliefs. People often wonder whether I'm religious or not. All I can tell you is that I see the truth in all the world's major religions and respect them accordingly. Some people think that makes me very religious, others think it doesn't make me religious at all because I don't subscribe to any one in particular. I've studied them all intently, and I honestly don't see the difference between them. The differences are few and trivial, whereas the similarities are plentiful and profound. This is important. Remember this. Because in 2008, he released the U Testament, which he describes with just so much text. So much. Let's start at the beginning. I was actually surprised that it booted at all on a modern Windows machine, but it runs in this terrible frame rate and defaults to 800 by 600. Digging into the game's folder, there's a separate windowed executable, which actually works just fine and supports my monitor's resolution. In this Bible game, there is a gore setting, and it defaults to extreme. I've got a character already created from my first time running it, so let's walk through the process properly now. The creator is quite in-depth, actually, letting you change your name, hometown, role, age, height, build, demeanor, and spec points into strength and agility. I don't really know what any of these things do yet, but I'm sure we'll find out. Let's bring that down for now. We can select from a number of builds: chubby, fat, slim, female, and normal. Demeanor only changes your eyebrows, otherwise there's a fair number of options for customizing your appearance. You will be named Sex Goku. We begin overlooking the River Jordan, where I assumed Jesus is being baptized by John the Baptist. He's not. It's kind of strange that it doesn't depict this very important event in the Gospels, but okay. It looks like we're going to be seeing the story of Jesus' ministry. There's people running about, getting into fights. It's a little chaotic. Now, if you've ever played any other game on a keyboard, you'll be very uncomfortable here. Movement keys cannot be rebound. The camera is automatic and it whips around willy-nilly. Movement is all relative to the center of the camera, so what's left 1 second won't be left when it spins around. The camera does have manual control using the mouse, but you end up fighting the automatic movement more often than not. Also, the main actions of the game are bound to A, S, Z, and X by default, meaning that unless you rebind them, you have to swap where your hands are whenever you want to do something. Well then, easy enough, let's go into settings. Okay, that's pause. How do you get to settings? Hit escape and you're right back to the menu. Yep. Hitting escape saves your progress and boosts you to the menu, the only place the options are selectable. You can sit, run, pick up, and manipulate. Let's try out sitting. Oh god! Oh, what are those eyes? Ugh. Approaching the river triggers a cutscene. The mouths are just a moving texture on top of closed lips, and the eyes, they're just 3D models on top of a face texture that shows the eyes closed. It's kind of a clever solve, which Dickie proudly describes on his website. It's even possible for the eyes to close completely, which is good for both temporary winces of pain and being unconscious on the floor. If nothing else, the simple act of blinking makes them feel more human. Really, it just leads to this disgusting, gelatinous look while they bulge out of the characters' skulls. Ugh. Every cutscene is accompanied by a citation at the top, and this is pretty much the same dialogue as you'll find in the Gospel. Let's take a second to admire the beautiful environment. Every location in this game is a tiny room with a little skybox enclosure. Signs mark the way to other locations, and it's not much of a map, but it boils down the essential locations of the Gospel events. When I say movement is uncomfortable, there's no zoom option, so I'm way out here. Credit where it's due, it's basically impossible to clip the camera through anything. I tried. Jesus tells me to go to the desert, but before I do, I try out some of the survival mechanics. Yes, these bars at the bottom represent physical health, mental health, and spiritual power. Physical health can be replenished by eating food, and mental health can be replenished by doing a couple things, but really the most practical is drinking water? I mean, how's anyone depressed? Just drink water. We head into the desert and find Jesus meditating. What's super weird is that in these verses, Jesus is being tempted by the devil to give in to worldly desires such as hunger, to which Jesus rejects. Except here, the player character, a normal person, is making the same demands? Instead of the devil telling Jesus to make bread for himself, the player is asking for bread to feed the people. But Jesus refuses with the same reasoning he gives in the Bible, except the context is totally different. Jesus in general comes off really strangely here, if you've ever actually read the Gospels. Now, Dickie says this is to challenge orthodox beliefs, but I don't really understand what the point of this depiction of Jesus is. Anyway, I discovered that holding backspace is the dedicated rave button. It does nothing but this. I walk back to the Jordan River and encounter this guy claiming to be a prophet. The verse at the top, Matthew 17:28, does not exist. I guess it's challenging the orthodox belief that the verses in the Bible are in the Bible? Being the strongest Christian Saiyan, Sex Goku, I decide to try out the combat by stopping some Roman guards from beating these onlookers. It's something. You kind of just mash one button and, I don't know, like, wait for one of you to drop dead? And speaking of, that would be me. After a very long zoom out, the credits play. I'm already suffering thinking of this happening every time. This game was made in 3 months, but was also the culmination of 8 years of games. The wrestling games gave us the combat. I don't know if you want to be proud of that. The industry sims gave us the conversations. Reach gave us the physical exhaustion. What? Hard Time gave us the law enforcement? World War Alpha gave us the scenery. Grassroots gave us the artificial intelligence. Wrecked gave us the fight for survival. Sure Shot gave us the storytelling. The M. Dickey Show gave us the morale. What the fuck is that? And finally, Big Bumps gave us the damaged human body. You're telling me. We're booted all the way back to the title screen and... Sex Goku is gone. Okay, new character, Samantha Beef. It looks like Jesus is randomly generated each time too, but follows a general look. For some reason, I don't encounter the false prophets and run straight to Tiberias, where we meet Jesus in a cutscene that references a story from Matthew. Basically, Jesus encounters a Gentile woman with more faith that he's the Messiah than most of the Jews. When he calls her a dog, he's echoing the bigoted feelings of the Jews towards Gentiles. So when he congratulates her on her faith, it's ironic and meant to get egg on the Jewish audience's face. Except, in the game, there's no Gentile woman. It's the player character, so without context, the point of the story is completely gone? Also, Jesus references the Force? Now, this is just tacky. Referencing some magic power in a Bible game is dumb. Like, what, is this challenging the idea that Jesus didn't have magic force powers? Wait, what does he mean channeling power into a vessel? And opening a third eye? Wait, concentrating power into the base of the spine to generate a spiritual energy called prana? You can't be serious. We are channeling prana, a Hindu term meaning life force, into our chakra tree. We meet Jesus again and he teaches us the miracle skill, nourishment, which converts spiritual power into physical and mental health. Jesus is unlocking our chakra points to give us superpowers. At this point, you settle into the game's pattern. Go to a location marked with a cross on the map to follow Jesus, get there, have about 2 exchanges with him, sometimes get a new power, sometimes solve a problem using it, then go to the next location. You can't bring up the map unless you're on a loading screen, meaning that you have to walk in and out of areas before you know where to go. This gets annoying fast, and contributes to the moment-to-moment gameplay being excruciatingly tedious. Your character's walk speed is mind-numbingly slow. Hitting the run key isn't a toggle. You can just hold it down without touching the arrows at all, actually, and you'll just run forward in whatever direction you're facing. Yeah, so it has both a free range of motion and tank controls? Eventually I learned that it's easier to play the game with the tank controls because I don't have to wrestle the camera as much to point in the direction I want. Turn rates still bog it down, but it's easier. The game loads decently fast, thankfully not so fast that you can't see the map, but it uses these quotes that would look at home on a men's motivational quotes Instagram, including everyone from Gandhi to Mark Twain to Obama, Jay-Z to... We go to Cana for the famous wedding story where Jesus turns water to wine, except here he has us grab any old object on the ground and he turns it into a cup of wine. This teaches us our next skill, manifestation, that lets you create almost any object in the game in your hand. You may have noticed that the Holy Land is in a state of constant chaos and fights breaking out in broad daylight. This is actually a commentary on the modern-day Palestinian... Nah, I'm just kidding. I have no fucking clue why people just run up and start beating each other. Our next miracle is magnetism, which literally draws people and objects towards you. This serves no practical purpose besides increasing the likelihood that an NPC will attack you. From here on out, it's just a fast track of a bunch of ridiculous abilities that never come up again and are mostly useless, like hypnosis, which renders NPCs unconscious. Do you ever need to knock someone out in the game? No. You can, but there's no real reason to. You meet someone from Jesus' family, who asks if you can tell him to come visit. When you find Jesus by Jewish Stonehenge, he tells you that he has no mother, for all people are his family, that he couldn't go back because too much has changed, and that the people you grow up with are in the past and not the future? Now, in the original passage, Jesus' family can't break through a crowd to see him, and so he says, "My mother and brothers are those who hear God's word and put it into practice." That's it. This version really ramps up the harshness in his tone, and I don't know why. I guess it's challenging the orthodox belief that Jesus wasn't, like, a little too aggressive? Oh, by the way, you can hug any NPC. In Jerusalem, we find the famous scene of Jesus going ape on the merchants in the temple. He tells us to stand up for what we believe in, and teaches us the miracle strength, which makes us impervious to all damage. My mental health's getting a little low. Let me take a dip in the water and... I'm stuck. I can't get up the steps. No matter how hard I try, I can't run. I can't jump. I can't get NPCs to push me high enough. I'm just stuck. The game lets you be 1 foot tall and doesn't account for a character actually being that height. I have no choice but to surrender to the water. New character, Mr. Big. Max height, we're not getting stuck on any stairs. Oh, and the game refuses to change its aspect ratio now for some reason, so let me just do some editing magic. There we go. Okay, let's just speed through everything and... I got stuck on the bridge. Between November 2009 and February 2010, Mat Dickey published not one, but 3 books. The first of these was Inspiration for the Interactive Generation. Gaming's most outspoken character finally speaks out about himself. For almost a decade, Mat Dickey electrified the games industry with his prolific output. He used unconventional methods to create unconventional games and redefined what could be achieved by one man. Audiences responded accordingly and ensured his underground rumblings would resonate around the world. For the first time ever, the true story behind that fascinating period is documented in this comprehensive book. You've played the games behind the life. Now get acquainted with the life behind the games. It has a 5-star review that says, "First, I must come clean and tell you that I am a huge fan of M. Dickey and have played all his games, especially the one where Jesus wrestled everyone and the one where you got to make games just like on that iPod game where you also got to make games. They were all really good, let me tell you, and so if you feel like me and had such a good time playing the games that this rebel of the games industry whose work is too good for the mainstream, if you feel like that, then you should also read his book because it's just like playing them, only instead of playing them, you get to read about how he made them before you played them, which is so awesome. He also gives you some amusing anecdotes and tips on how to live a good life and be successful like him. I remember one time PC Format Magazine interviewed him for their magazine. It's written by... Hey. His second book, Sportuality, is about the connection between sports and religion. It has no reviews, sadly. His third and final book is Atheism, the Ignorance of Atheism. At a point in time when every other person is an unblinking atheist, Atheism offers the most cogent argument against the movement yet. Dispensing with philosophical jargon and pretentious posturing, religious educator Mat Dickey brings a refreshing dose of common sense to the debate. He exposes the ignorant assumptions made by the cynical mind and reveals the arguments against religion to be anything but rational. As the title of the book suggests, he considers atheism to be the irrational fear of religion and leaves us in no doubt that we embrace such a negative worldview to our detriment. There's 2 1-star reviews calling the book out for being inconsistent and full of strawman arguments, and one calls him a charlatan. And there's one more 5-star review, though, and it's from... He did it again! Okay, how likely is it that both of those reviews are from someone impersonating him? I wouldn't dismiss it, because the account has no other history besides just those 2 reviews. Both posted on the same day, 3 years after the books were published. So, is it not him? Maybe. But it's really funny to think that it is. Okay, that default character from when I was trying to boot the game, let's just go with him, Matthias. Just a standard build, no stairs, no bridges, no problems. And we've got white, bleached hair Jesus this time. Jesus tells us not to perform miracles in front of other people, he says while walking on water. We gain the ability weightlessness and can walk on water by changing our molecular structure. Something about Jesus using science terms is so cringy to me. Like, did Onision write this? Oh no, I'm found out. This never happens again, in my playthrough at least, despite me using miracles in broad daylight all the time. There's this bit where we are literally draining Jesus' energy by being around him. The story this is based on is one where a woman who suffers from bleeding touches Jesus' robe and gets healed. He does ask who touched him, but it isn't in a hostile way. He just wants to know because he felt his power being used. Here, Dickie depicts it as exhausting Jesus. like he's a shonen anime character who's using his power too much. Regardless, he cleanses a man of an evil spirit and teaches us the power to control people's bodies. Really, Jesus unlocks our chakra and gives us the ability to forcibly possess someone. I don't know how this challenges any orthodox beliefs. It's just out of character. Next up, the ability to terraform the environment. What? This has no impact on gameplay, no use in any scenario you're put in. Jesus just says you can move mountains, and you get the skill. Dickie is really scraping the bottom of the barrel here. He tells us to go to Mount Hernon, and in order to reach him, we need to use our new powers of literal levitation. This, combined with weightlessness, allows us to safely drop onto the cliff. See, I wish there was more stuff like this. There's 18 different powers in this game, and they're never used in interesting ways for anything. With its survival elements and this huge assortment of skills, it almost feels like the game wants to be a sandbox, but it's also kind of linear, and using the powers doesn't result in anything much more interesting than maybe starting fights. The world is so remarkably non-functional that all these mechanics the player has access to have no systems to interact with. Anyway, we follow Jesus to Caesarea Philippi and up the mountain very slowly. Once we're at the top, he starts talking to us about the material world. Now, this is referencing the Transfiguration, which is an event in the Gospels where Jesus takes 3 of his apostles up to a mountain to pray. Jesus reveals his divine form, and they're visited by Moses and Elijah, who are 2 patriarchs of Judaism. The voice of God comes down and says that it's pleased with him. The original story is meant to show the apostles' world opening up and them struggling with Jesus' heavenly nature. Here, Jesus starts talking about the material world and how we need to see the world for what it truly... What the fuck? Okay, props. This is probably the best moment of the game. It legitimately caught me off guard, and it would have been really cool if it was in a better game. Oh god, you can see their eyeballs pulsing. Now you gain the power to see the code, to see through the illusion of the world. You get to play the game in wireframe mode. Completely, utterly useless. We gain a new ability to control water levels. Gee, that would have been helpful earlier. You don't even need to save the people who got flooded in the first place using the power. It's just something you get. Jesus resurrects Lazarus and expends all of his power, exhausting him and sending him to the ground. The game cites Peter 2:24, but there's 2 different books of Peter, one of which has no 2:24, and the other is in the middle of a totally unrelated story. Jesus continues to make references to things like karma to challenge the orthodox belief that Jesus didn't believe in Hinduism. We suddenly have a fake-out death with no prompting that Jesus saves us from, only for him to tell us to meditate more. More random things from the Gospels happen, like the story where Jesus praises the innocence of children. In this game, he says that to master life, we must be like a child. This lets us change our size. I should mention that Dickie refers to God as a she throughout the game. I used the challenging orthodox beliefs gag 1 paragraph ago. I don't want to use it again, but I will say, what does this fundamentally change or subvert besides being a little gotcha? Jesus gives out the great value version of the Lord's Prayer. I don't know why it's different. He doesn't say anything functionally different from the actual prayer, like, pretty sure it's not copyrighted. For the first time in my playthrough, I actually run out of mental health, which sends me into a frenzy of attacking people. It really has no impact on gameplay besides maybe getting you killed. According to the manual and website, every NPC has a consistent relationship with you that can be improved or soured depending on your actions. But like, why bother? Even if you were to turn the entire population of Israel against you, the most impact it would have is that the people would attack you more often. So it could make it harder to progress, but forming good relationships doesn't do anything very substantial either. I'm sorry, game, you can pretend to be mad about making moral choices, but if you don't attach actual meaningful characters or changes to those choices, these will just be creepy 3D models that I have no reason to be invested in. Finally, we get the powers of speed and time, allowing us to get through this repetitive drivel faster. We visit John the Baptist at Golgotha, also known as Calvary, where he's been crucified? But John the Baptist was beheaded? And why does his cross say INRAI? In fact, why do any of these crosses say INRAI? INRAI stands for Iesus Nazaremus Rex Iudaeorum, meaning Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. It was a placard specifically made to mock Jesus at his execution? It makes no sense for it to show up here, before that event, or on anyone's cross but his. For someone who claims to be a religious educator, this is a pretty basic fact to get so wrong. Like, honestly embarrassing. The hour of Jesus' death draws near, and he teaches us the final miracle, invisibility. Very cool and useful. We see the Last Supper, and next up is the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, in the Gospels, Gethsemane was where Jesus went in the hours before his arrest, and he specifically tells his apostles to wait outside the area he wants to pray. It's a very famous scene where he's so afraid of what's about to happen that he starts sweating blood. He has to seek solitude to pray for strength, because when he's on the hill, he knows that he has to carry his cross alone. And here there's a bunch of NPCs running around, and he asks you all to pray with him in a group. I guess these are the apostles? Are we one of the apostles? We're at the same scenes, but there's only 10 NPCs lined up when Jesus gives his last speech before entering Jerusalem, and there's only like 7 or 8 during the Last Supper. There's a cup bouncing around, just like the Bible. You could actually choose to be Judas here and betray Jesus. I'd already known about this from the website, but I assumed that it would play out closer to how it is presented in the Bible. Like, after the Last Supper, a Roman guard would approach me and offer to pay me the 30 pieces of silver. I mean, it wouldn't have meant anything because there's no money system in this game. Really, there's not even an ability to indulge in material possessions. You'd think that a Bible game with moral choices would have something like that. Anyway, I accidentally leave the circle after Jesus asks us to pray with him, and then, I guess I'm just locked out of not being Judas. So I go to Jerusalem and get approached by a centurion. But he doesn't bribe me. He convinces you that he'll support Jesus? So when you sell Jesus out, it isn't because of a temptation for worldly possessions. It's just being fucking stupid. Kind of robs any significance from the story. Is this challenging the orthodox belief that stories should have some substance? Jesus gets beat up and I chew on some Wonder Bread. There's a really slow bit leading up to the crucifixion. In the Gospels, there's a whole segment of Jesus being put on trial, then being sentenced and tortured. The New Testament skips the trial and decides to have you hop back and forth between Gehenna and Calvary. You even have to go through the 3 denials of Peter. Wait, are there even 3? Now you're carrying the cross for Jesus. This highlights one of the biggest problems with this game's way of telling the story of the Gospels. In the book, Jesus is constantly interacting with different people throughout his ministry, and who those people are is very important to those stories having any meaning. A lot of gospel stories are almost unreadable without knowledge of the various intermingling cultures in that area and at that time. Here, those stories have no context, not because it isn't explained, but because those key characters are replaced with your own blank slate OC who doesn't fit at all into the story. It's like if you were watching a TV show with a cast of established characters, but then they didn't show up for the climax, and instead a random extra just walked on set. If the point of the New Testament was to challenge orthodox religious ideas, why? What is being challenged here? Because you present Jesus as being kind of a dick? Because he makes Star Wars references? Because he's Hindu? If you want to relay the message that major religions have more in common, why pick a single religion to focus on, then ham-fistedly shove in references from other ones instead of building a story where you can actually explore the overlaps between the different faiths? Why make it a survival game? Is it because you need to maintain physical and mental health in real life? And it's expressed through gameplay as eating food, drinking water, and using your magic powers. And if your mental health gets too low, you fly into a rage. Got it, just like in real life. Why have 18 different powers if none of them are meaningful from a gameplay perspective? By the end, you're getting things like size change, face change, costume change, just transparently flipping values in the engine. There's a handful of instances where you actually need to use the powers to solve problems. Here's an example. Jesus is in prison, and the guard tells you to pay up to free him. I immediately see if I can use hypnosis on him to knock him out and steal the key. But no, the solution is to manifest a bag of money. This is one of the few times you need to actually be somewhat creative, which caught me off guard, but it frustrated me because it just made me think of how many ways these abilities could be used. Hypnotism? Never used. Magnetism? Never used. Possession? Never used. On top of the useless ones like terraforming sea levels and wireframe mode. There are no goals in the game outside of trailing Jesus, and any harmful actions you do only makes doing that harder with no selfish upside because there's no systems in place for that. There are no characters besides you and Jesus, and he just barks at you and maybe gives you a lecture if you do something bad. Apparently, if you hang around women too much, you'll spontaneously get one pregnant. I assume that this works even if your character's body type is female. But why? What's the point of having all this? This false prophet I met is apparently Satan, and if you hang around him long enough, you can cast fireballs? That's cool, but why? With just the powers of infinite food, healing, making matter, invulnerability, and control of time, I'd call your character overpowered, but there's no systems to even interact with. I can imagine a game where this wide array of powers is used for cool puzzle solving, getting bigger or smaller to fit through a passage or reach something you couldn't, possessing someone's body and having them start a fight as a distraction, hell, going into wireframe mode to see through walls. Dickie said in a 2008 interview, "The big ambition was to make a game about a game character who doesn't know he's a game character. I would then have lots of fun exposing how a game is made and how it would screw with your mind if you were part of a creation, kind of like a gaming version of The Truman Show. When I sat down to make it though, it turned out the best way to impart that message was to add a religious element by following the footsteps of a guy like Jesus who knows how life really works. That's how the New Testament came about." Now this is a juicy quote. First off, that concept is really cool and I'd like to see it done more competently. Second, his comment about needing to make it religious. I kind of see where he's coming from, but he seems to get so sidetracked with shoving in his own beliefs about religion that the game ends up having no message like he refers to. It doesn't make any sense to make Jesus into a subversive character because he already is one. Jesus contradicted the belief at the time that a Messiah would be a warmonger who would conquer the Holy Land by force. So when he arrives as a lowly carpenter, preaching tolerance and loving your enemies, he's already challenging orthodox beliefs. So what else could Dickie be talking about? I guess the assumption that Christian ideas are unique, and while it's true that Jesus shared beliefs with other figures like Buddha and Muhammad, expressing this by having him make direct references to things like karma and chakra barely even communicates that point. You could have had an instance where two separate faiths realized they agreed on things, or make the player choose between skills that represent two different faiths but actually accomplish the same thing. Then when they realize the redundancy, it can be a clever moment, and the abilities can actually be useful instead of random nonsense. Everything that's even mildly interesting is underdeveloped. It's a slog to play with no redeeming factors besides how unrelentingly surreal it is. Even that wears off eventually though, and you're just going from A to B, doing nothing interesting and making no interesting choices in a game that wants you to think so desperately that it's being deep. I don't like to bag on indie developers who do it all themselves. I have a great appreciation for them. I mean, I think Zun is awesome. But the difference between someone like Mat Dickey and Zun is that the latter is actually pretty good at every aspect of game development. They both took basically the same strategy at around the same time, but one built a multimedia empire from his room, and the other is being interviewed by school papers about how no one in the games industry can afford to pay him. I will say, to end this on a positive note, that to anyone who's out there doing something you're passionate about, finding any kind of success, and even no success is some kind of success, that's great. And as long as you aren't being annoying about it, then all the power to you. So that's about as much as I have to say on the topic of M. Dickey and the U Testament for now. I have to go, I want to go shave. But before that, I'm gonna sign off. Love ya.